are recording. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching tonight, tuning in tonight. I hope you enjoy my new backdrop, which is some guitars. The good ones are over there in cases. I'm Ben Tent, and with me tonight is an incredibly influential person, musician, guitarist in the guitar field. If you've never heard of him, your teacher has, and their teacher probably studied with him because he has that much of a reach. I studied with him for a couple of years at the Hart School when I was in my master's. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Provost, thank you so much for having me, for being here tonight.
I have no place to go. It's snowing outside, Ben.
How many inches do you have up in Bloomfield?
Last time I looked, I was out earlier today, believe it or not, taking pictures in the snow. And back then, around 3 o'clock, it was probably 8 inches. So I'm thinking we probably got 10 inches or a foot by now.
So, I injured my knee just a little. It's not a big injury, but a little one. And I was supposed to go to physical therapy today, which is about 1.5 miles from my house. And I looked outside at 10 a.m. thinking, yeah, by 3 o'clock, I'll be able to. No.
Oh, no. 10 o'clock debated, but not at 3.
Yeah, no, I'm done. So we could talk about just about anything. The thing about your career and your life is that you have done a little bit of everything and a lot of a lot. You know just about everything, and when it seems like you're wrong, you're usually right. Why don't we start with the question I ask everybody is, during these quarantine months, obviously a major shift to your schedule and what you do, but how have you been during the quarantine?
Well, fortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, I'm retired from full-time teaching. So I have a couple of private students that I still maintain, and so they initially were done strictly by Zoom sites, and that worked out very, very well. They're both, even though one's a 16-year-old, he's a very talented student who had been studying with me for a couple of years. So with the exception of being able to play along to demonstrate some subtle musical things, that's about the only thing we couldn't do on Zoom, which was a bit of a frustration, but now I'm back to, both of these guys are coming over for lessons. So they wear masks, and so there's no big problem with that.
Yeah. And other than, I mean, I'm trying to think of the last time I saw you play. It had been a while because I had sort of stopped coming around due to my full-time job and moving far away. But are you missing out right now on any playing opportunities, or has that started to slow down too?
No, because I actually decided 2 years ago, just when I retired from Hart, I was going to stop playing. I've got some arthritis in my left hand, and it doesn't affect me from playing. I get some discomfort, but simple things like doing a B minor chord, I can't bend the second finger to get the B minor chord consistently. Most days it's okay, but you know what happens as soon as you schedule a performance, that's the day that the finger acts up, and it hasn't been acting. So I did a couple of things with Chris at the last 2 years ago at the last summer festival, and it was too unpredictable. It was. I mean, everybody thought that the concert went well that I did there, and I was pretty happy overall with it. I didn't like the fact that I literally had to warm up for an hour and a half before I walked on the stage.
Wow.
So I could count on my fingers doing what I wanted them to do. I mean, I would always allow a good hour to warm up before a concert, but essentially I probably would warm up probably 20 to 30 minutes tops, because it didn't take that long to get my hands coming around. But with the arthritis, I can't predict anymore. So I still practice. I try to do a couple of hours a day. Being retired, I've been able to devote much more time to my photography. And so sometimes I get wrapped up in photography like I did today and spent 2 or 3 hours trying to take a different kind of a photo of snow falling, which I, after 2 hours of experimenting on my front porch, I was able to go across the street to the golf course and come up with a couple of very cool photos which I'll probably post on Instagram in a couple of days.
What were you trying to get, if you don't mind me asking?
I was trying to get the snowflakes in slow motion.
Oh, wow.
Which once you get it, once I got it, it creates this kind of slash going, especially if you're shooting. What I did is Gillette Ridge across the street from me. I'm across from the 16th hole, and this year they kept open for the whole season. So when you walk out there with the snow, there's still the flags in the holes. So where this 16th hole is, there's a nice batch of trees in the back of it. So I had a dark background, and I got the flag in it. And because of the dark background, at a slow enough shutter speed, I was able to get the streaks of the snow.
Oh, okay.
And so it's like, I don't know if you've ever seen star trails. Have you ever seen photos of star trails where
Sure. Yeah. But that's using a time lapse, right?
Well, it's a time exposure, right?
Right.
So this thing here, and that was the frustrating part, is I just assumed I had to slow the shutter speed down. In actual fact, you don't slow the shutter speed down.
Right.
So star trails, you might do, well, there are different ways of doing it, but essentially you're doing 5-minute bursts for maybe over an hour. And then you merge all the photos together and you get this continuous trail. But here, what you do is you had to figure out what the speed was, and it was strictly a time and trial and error kind of situation. So I finally figured out that 1/10 of a second with the exposure I was using gave me, against the dark background, you could see these nice crisscrossing things.
Right.
And
so that makes sense, right? Because if you open the shutter longer, you'll get more of a streak, but then your background will get blown out.
Exactly. And so it's the exact opposite. You have to do less. And so I was experimenting. I started with a 30th of a second, and it came down and found out that 1/10 worked the best in for that particular shot that I was.
That's awesome. I'm excited. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, it was a cool effect. Yeah. At least I liked it this afternoon. I'll let you know when I look at it tomorrow.
Yeah. I think the peak of my photography career was I still have, and I still shoot on a Canon Rebel T5, which is a micro, which is a crop sensor, and it's fine for what I do. But me and a couple friends, we snuck around Hartford late at night. We went to the train tracks. We actually climbed up, not climbed up, but took the elevator up the top floor of the Marriott and got some really cool time lapse 30-second exposure of 91 north and south right next to each other. And so I was pretty happy with that. And those
are cool. I like doing those, and that's a good location to shoot from, because you got plenty of traffic going by at night, and
that was a fun time.
Yeah.
So let's get right into it. I mean, you're kind of a legend, and you've done quite a bit of this and that, and I think most people probably know you at this point in your life from teaching, and where you sort of held down the fort for a very long time. But before we get to the Hart School, can you kind of tell me how you came in to the guitar? I know very briefly your background in music, and I don't know anything about your childhood, but your sort of how you got into music, and why don't you take us through that?
Okay, so basically, as a kid growing up, my grandfather would take me every Saturday to watch the B movies at the local movie theater, which were Westerns. And so I wanted a horse. So I came home one day after going to the movies, and I said to my mother, I want a horse.
Nice.
And since we were not living out in the country anyway, well, she said, you like Gene Autry, right? And I said, yeah, I like Gene Autry. Yeah. He said, well, he plays guitar. Why don't we start with a guitar? And if you get really good at guitar, we'll buy you a horse. So that's how I started playing the guitar.
That's a smooth parenting move.
Yes, a very smooth parenting move. And up until my mother passed away a number of years ago, I used to say to her periodically, has my playing improved enough to get the horse yet? And she would still say, play along. She'd say, not yet, but you're getting close. Keep doing it. Yeah. So I started off with a local guy in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and when I was in elementary school, I started, because of this guy's studio, I got hooked up with some other guitar players. And so by the time I was 11 or 12, I was playing in a small band. And it was more like a country western kind of band as far as instrumentation. It was a pedal steel player. There was a bass player, and myself and a drummer.
There was an 11-year-old playing pedal steel.
No, the pedal steel player was older. The pedal steel player was probably 18 or 19. I was the youngest guy in the band. I was probably 12 years old at the time.
Wow.
And so we started playing a lot of clubs. And my parents would obviously drive me to these clubs. But then my mother was working as a bookkeeper for a local dry cleaner. And one of the guys who worked there, one of the dry cleaners, was a very, very good jazz bass player. And so at some point, he came to one of these gigs, one of these small little bars we were playing in. I was about 16 at the time. I was just in my junior year in high school. And he came in and sat down, heard the band play. And when he went to work on Monday, he said to my mother, he said, look, your son's a really good guitar player, but he's got to start studying with somebody who can teach him how to play. And at that time, there was a fellow teaching at the Hart School by the name of Vincent Breedice. And so I went down and I signed up and started taking lessons through the community division with him. And at that time, his big excuse me, his big guitar student was a guy by the name of Joe DiOrio, a guitar player from Waterbury. And Joe was a great jazz player. And so I didn't know Joe very well, but Joe's lesson was always before mine or right after mine. So I would always, through the door, could sit and hear him play. Then Joe ultimately moved to Florida and ultimately became the guitar player for Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass.
Oh, wow.
And ended up being the head of the jazz department at USC in LA until maybe, I think 10 years ago, he had a mild stroke and he retired and he moved back to Waterbury. So he still teaches in the air. In fact, Rich Goldstein has taken some lessons with Joe.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But so that was the guy I studied with. And so when I entered Hart, you couldn't major in guitar. So my teacher said, you really want to major in music theory because that's the way you're going to learn the most about music, which I did. And so when I came in, all you had to do was audition and play a classical piece on electric guitar, which is what I did. So
I can do that.
So I studied 4 years of Hart, my entire undergraduate 4 years at Hart. Before they had a jazz department, I was studying jazz.
What was the piece you played on electric?
Oh, I forget what it was. At some point, I played the B minor bourrée from the second violin partita.
Yeah. Wow.
There were all kinds of arrangements that were done, put out. Mel Bay did a lot of these things, and so essentially, other than the 6 weeks before the end of the semester juries, I would basically, actually, when it was about maybe 4 weeks before the end of the semester, juries. Up until that time, I would be working and playing jazz. And Hart at that time had a really active student body that were really strong jazz players as well as classical players. The name that most people would remember from that era would be Houston Person, big tenor saxophone player.
Okay, name sounds familiar. Yeah.
So Houston came to Hart. I think I must have been maybe a sophomore or junior when he came in. He was in the service and he came in for a couple of years. And I had the good fortune of playing some gigs with Houston. But you had people like a really great jazz accordionist from Waterbury, Tony Valletta, who was again a war vet from the Korean War. Another guy, Don De Palma. And then there were a bunch of young guys, Rich Lepore, who was a year behind me. He went out and had a very successful career in LA. Lenny LaCroix, Russ Elliott, John Mills.
These are guitar players or
No,
just people in the jazz?
These are all different instrumentalists, horn players who
in the jazz program.
There was no jazz program. We were all.
You're right. In the theory. My bad.
They were either theory majors, music ed majors, or a few of them, like Richie, was a percussion major. He was a double percussion and that. Okay, but so that was the whole nucleus. So we spent most of our nights just jamming. You know, after 8 o'clock, when all the classes in the old Hart building were done, nobody was around, so nobody would bother us, and we played jazz. And so that's what I did for 4 years. And when I stayed on for my master's, they decided that I had to study piano. And at that time, I was doing a lot of gigging. And fortunately for me, the dean of that school was Sam Berkman. His wife was Irene Kahn, and she unfortunately got stuck with me as a piano student. But I was also her teaching assistant at that time for ear training. So she knew I was a good player, and her son John was a very well-regarded West Coast session player and studio player out in LA. So about the first 3 lessons I came in for piano, I was really poorly prepared. She said, "Why aren't you practicing?" I said, "Miss Khan, I've got this gig. I'm playing 4 nights a week with some great musicians, some of the better musicians in Hartford. I'm busy learning tunes and doing that." So after about the 3rd lesson, when she said, "Look," she said, "you have no business playing piano. So we're going to do something." So she talked to her husband. And so for the 2 years of my graduate school, I was allowed to study guitar, play classic guitar, but I studied with a lutenist, Joseph Iadon. And as I got more serious about the classic guitar, I decided I needed to study with a guitarist. So I started taking weekly lessons with one of 3 of the better known classic guitar teachers in New York, a fellow by the name of Alexander Bello. And I studied with Bello until 68, when I auditioned and was accepted to play in the last of Segovia's 6 weeks master classes in Compostela. So
before we get to, I can't wait to get into the Segovia stuff, but I just want to know, because a lot of the people that I talk to, and I'm sure a lot of the people that you've come into contact with over the years, classical guitarists, a lot of us don't discover it until later, a little bit later in our lives. I have a very similar story to yours. I discovered it in undergrad, but I wasn't serious about it until a little bit before grad school. But my question for you is, what was it? Because you were going to grad school for theory, is that correct?
Yes.
So what was it that, because you're obviously at the time an accomplished jazz player, you're playing gigs, you're making some sort of living doing that, you're playing with higher caliber musicians. What is it that attracted you to say, oh, you know what, this is kind of magical, I want to do this too?
Now, here's to burst your bubble.
Yeah.
I wasn't attracted to classic guitar.
No.
I had a choice, play piano or play classic guitar. So,
Yeah.
at that time, bossa nova was just starting to catch on. So my whole attraction, if there was, oh, this is great. I'll learn fingerstyle and I'll be able to play it on gigs, and we can do bossa nova because Charlie Bird was just coming out. So,
Sure.
uh, so what I have to say, working with Joseph Iadone, he was really big in Renaissance music, Renaissance lutenist, and very big in playing accompanying lute songs. So a couple of the courses I took were courses with him accompanying lute songs. So I started working with a lot of the singers who wanted to do this, and I worked with some very good singers at that time, accompanying lute songs. But really, that's all I could do because um, I could develop enough of us. I had enough natural facilities to do enough scale technique to play what a lute song would require. Okay, but I didn't have any kind of scale chops, or forget about arpeggios. I mean, I knew nothing about them. So that's, but because I started getting more and more involved with classical music, and then I had in grad school, I became friends with a number of string players who, for whatever reason, they liked the way I played, and they say, "Oh, we've got this string quartet. Why don't we do?" Paganini wrote some string quartets with guitar.
Right.
Why don't we play those? And fortunately for me, they weren't that hard. They were the few arpeggios were PIMA, and everything else was basically boom chick. But I had the opportunity of working. I mean, the first violinist with this group was a fellow by the name of oh God, what's his name? Phil.
Philharmonic.
Phil Reuter was his name.
Oh.
Philip Reuter. Okay. And he ultimately, when he left Hart, when he graduated, got his master's from Hart, he became the principal violinist with the Cincinnati Orchestra, which a position he held for his life. And then the violist went on to be a violist with the Cleveland Symphony. The cellist went on to a very good career with the London Symphony. And one of the second violinist had a very successful career with Detroit Symphony. And so these were the people I was playing with. So, now I enjoyed playing with these, playing with musicians of that caliber was like playing a really good jazz gig, except a jazz gig, I had the chops and I had the vocabulary to do that, but I didn't. So that's what prompted me to go to New York for lessons.
So you go to New York and you start studying with somebody who is a different caliber and also plays a different type of instrument than the guy that you're studying with in Hartford. What were some of the things that you were exposed to immediately that changed your mind about this instrument?
Well, the first thing he did, which I did for a number of years, but now the last student that I taught that ever did this was Chris Lamb. Okay. I was taught, whatever piece you learned, go out and buy the best recording of that piece. So that's what this guy would give me. So if I played the Darwin Fantasia number 7, at that time, the best recording was by Julian Bream. Go out and buy that recording by Julian Bream. Okay. And now this guy's way of teaching was, look, I'm teaching you the technical skills. You've got the musical skills because you got a degree already. You know how to practice. So there's no reason why you can't learn this piece and play it at a level comparable with that recording. Okay, so every piece that he gave me, I bought the recording. So if you've ever been to my house, you know that I probably have 500 CDs in my collection. Yeah, and I've probably got another 100 vinyl albums still. Okay, but when you buy an album, every time you learn a new piece, you're exposed to all of the music on that recording. Unlike downloading something from YouTube, from iTunes, you download the tune. You don't know what the rest of that is. Or you go on YouTube, and what I like about YouTube is the exposure you get to players of all levels,
Right.
But the downside of YouTube for me is that unless you have the ability to tell a good player from a bad player, all you can tell is if they're hitting the notes or not hitting the notes in classical music when you're first starting off. So unless you can be direct, and I'm not crazy about the quality of sound on YouTube. I don't care how well how well the initial recording that you post up. It's such a compressed thing.
Right.
I can tolerate it more easily listening to jazz on it because the compression is less noticeable on jazz. But I really have a hard time listening to many things on YouTube, especially if it's a good performance, because it's such a compressed sound.
Well, there's something really special about, I think, our instrument, the fact that it's a relatively small piece of wood with relatively simple materials. And when you try to record that, I mean, you're going to color the recording no matter what, even if it's the best recording in the world. But then when you put it onto a digital format that really isn't that great, you lose a lot of that, of the true character of the instrument.
Well, what I feel compression does is because of the limited dynamic range of the top, everything we do is based on very subtle movements. Okay, so that if you want to really bring out a forte, you got to really press hard. You got to have a really good technique and a good guitar to give you a good forte and a good piano that can be heard, and all the shadings. Okay.
You're not sweating unless you're not playing double forte if you're not sweating. Richard Provost, 2015.
No. You should
did say that.
No, you should never be sweating. If you've got a good technique and you learn the piece well, you should not be sweating. You should be playing with just enough energy to make the music come alive. But that compression compresses that subtle aspect. That's what you don't lose. I've had students come in when I was teaching full time at the college. Students would download MP3 files of a classical piece, and they played for me in the lesson. And I say to them, "That's not the recording I told you to get." "Yeah, it's by so and so. Look." So, "Oh, okay." And this was before I put all my stuff on iTunes, so I could just access it from. So I take the CD out, put it in my CD player on my laptop, and say, "This is the recording." "Oh my God,
Yeah.
It's so different." "Yeah, you got an MP3 file. It's compressed a ton." So what goes on, and the compression MP3 is probably about the same as what is the compression that goes on with YouTube.
Sure.
So it really changes the subtlety and the expressiveness of it, you know.
Yeah.
Now conversely, I saw it Saturday. I watched the Beijing duo play for the for the Baltimore Guitar Society, and that was a Zoom thing. And I have to say that was a stunning performance. But what they did is they pre-recorded it, then re-recorded the soundtrack, and then remixed the soundtrack. And so it really felt like you were listening to them play in your living room. It was one of the most enjoyable concerts. And the musical subtlety that they did, I don't know what it would have been live if I heard it. I know this, I would not have heard some of the things that I heard in a large concert hall because it would have gotten lost.
Swallowed up.
I know afterwards, I was commenting there. They had a little interview for anybody who wanted to, and so I was there, and it just so happened Manuel was there as well. And I made a count. They were playing this piece that starts with some really sophisticated tapping on the top of the guitar. And I really commented on it. I said, usually I get very frustrated when I hear guitar players tap on the guitar because everything sounds like a big boom. There's no finesse. But you guys sounded like it was a really good hand drummer who could really control all the nuances of the sound, you know. And at that point, Manuel said, I know exactly what you're talking about. I have the same frustration, you know.
Yeah.
And it's that's the kind of subtle things that all young guitar players have to work through.
Right.
And so that's the dilemma. So what I miss most about the COVID, and there's no, I mean, you know, I was going to I'd go to the orchestra concerts, I go to hear piano recitals, I'd hear Anton and Rita play or whatever. And that's the frustrating thing. I did hear Anton and Rita did a great thing right after the first of the year with some group in England that was zoomed in. That was really exquisitely done, you know. Nice. But that's it right now. You're really limited. You can't go to the Hartford Symphony. You can't go to hear the Heart Symphony. You know.
Absolutely.
So you're go to a club, hear a good jazz group.
No, you can't. All you can do is dig into some records and practice.
That's it.
So you're in New York, and you're studying with this guy. Let's get to the big juicy Segovia bits. So you mentioned that you got to audition and then play in his last series of master classes.
So what had happened was Segovia played with the Bridgeport Symphony in December of '67. And a friend of mine was a principal clarinetist. So he arranged for me to go sit for the rehearsal when Segovia was rehearsing the Tedesco concerto. Mm-hmm. And so afterwards, I went backstage and talked to Segovia. And I was going to be playing that same concerto in the spring with the Hartford Chamber Orchestra. And so I went backstage with the score, and he very graciously answered a lot of my questions I had about changes that he had made in the score and how to go about doing this. And then I asked him, I said, Maestro, I said, I spoke to Rose Augustine earlier, and she said that you're not doing a master class in Compostela this year. She said, oh, no. I'm doing the class. He said, I'm going to be late coming in. So I'm only going to be there for 4 weeks, and Tomas will be there the first 2 weeks. So it'll still be a 6-week class. But Tomas will teach the first 2 weeks, and then I'll come in, I'll teach the rest. And so I said, what do we do? He said, I need a live recording of you playing a concert. That was the audition. Didn't care what the repertoire was. And so I had played a faculty recital at Hart that year and had it recorded. And so I sent them a reel-to-reel tape out to Spain of that. And so maybe 2 months before the class was in August, so I would say maybe May, I got a letter saying I had been admitted to the class. And the tuition for the class was $26. That's right, $26. Now it gets better. Once I fly over there and
what was the plane ticket? Like a bag of chips? What did you...
the plane ticket was $600.
Oh no!
For my wife and I, round trip. My wife and I went out, and so I made the money. I played the 3-penny opera for the Hartford Stage Company for 6 weeks. They gave me more than enough to pay for my plane trip over there.
Yeah.
So when you got to Spain, Compostela, and you registered, the woman, because it was all underwritten by the Spanish government, says to me, do you need the scholarship for the tuition? And I said, it's $26. She's yes, we can give you a scholarship. I said, no, I can get $26. So that,
oh goodness.
Yeah, that was that. Okay. So now what happened was, what they didn't tell you, and luckily I ran into an American, a guy by the name of Larry Schnitzler. this is somebody that Chris also studied with, and when he was in D.C. And Larry had been to a number of Segovia classes with him, and so he took it upon his wing to take all the Americans. There were 5 or 6 of us that were all there, and he took us under his wing. He showed us where to get places to stay. We got a nice little pension right around the corner from where the classes were held.
Right.
And he said, you realize that the first day of class, you have to audition. And we all said, but we send a tape. He said, well, yeah, that's just, now the audition is to determine how many times you're going to play for Segovia.
Wow.
I said, okay, all right. So that wasn't so bad. So I played, we played, I played A2 number 11, which was a piece I thought I could play really well. And my hand shook a little bit, but it worked fine. But then that was for Tomas, okay? And so the first couple of weeks, there were about 6 or 7 people in the class playing for Tomas. And but then after 2 weeks when Segovia came, then we discovered that the class, there were 13 people in the class. But this was the reason Segovia had the class, was that there was a big competition in runs. And so Oscar was in the class, Parkening was in the class, Barbosa Lima was in the class, Michael Lormer was in the class.
Yeah.
Then there were 3 or 4 really top level European guitar players that were all in the class. So all of these people are in the class. So at that point, that's when Segovia showed up, and that's when these guys showed up. So the beauty of that class was that you heard Segovia teach all of these guys that were way better than you, okay? And that's how I got to know Michael Lormer very well, and that's how I got hooked up with Oscar. For whatever reason, Oscar heard something in my playing that he thought was great, and he gave me a few lessons there, because when I was over there, I was playing off the right side of the nail, like Patrick was talking about, because Bello was great friends with Presley Lagoya, and he taught the right side of the nail technique. And when I played for Segovia, he said, you might want to consider switching to the left side. He said, I think it would suit your hands and your style better. And I said, fine. And which I did. I made the switch in 2 days.
Did that alleviate a lot of tension as well in the wrist?
It made a tremendous amount of difference in the tension. I never had much tension in the wrist because I have a very flexible right wrist. So I could get over there, and I never did a fully, mine was more of a rotation of the hand this way rather than this way, okay?
Right.
And so it was more, more of a tilt. And because I've got a fairly long a finger, that was not a big deal. And if I did I and A scales, it worked pretty well for that technique, okay? But switching over the left, and that's how I got hooked up with Oscar. And literally, he showed me how to make that switch in literally 3 days.
Wow.
But
well, what were some of the things that you got from Segovia?
The biggest thing you got from Segovia, and I know, like John Williams felt that Segovia was trying to impose his thinking on him and the way he played, and I don't deny that. I think for somebody of John's talent, I think that was probably true. And the fact that he suggested I switch from playing the right side to the left side, I suppose John would be justified in saying, yeah, he influenced the way I played. But this was a technique that I wasn't comfortable with. I was playing because that was what was available to me. And I knew that I was different. Breen was playing off the left side. Segovia played off the left side. And there were certain limitations that I had from playing off that side, okay? I had no problem listening to Ida Presti play. I mean, she was a phenomenal player. But even her husband, Lagoya, he had a great thumb sound, but he didn't have the best, for my taste, he didn't have the best finger sound. Okay.
Right.
And that I attribute to playing off the right side of the nail. Now, is that true or not? For me, it was, because I could get a good thumb sound, but I couldn't get a good nail sound until I switched to the left side. Okay. But for me, what Segovia did is when I played the first movement of the Ponce Third Sonata for him, I had changed a lot of his fingerings. Now, unlike what he did later in life, where he would, if somebody came in and changed the fingering, he didn't rip me apart. He basically asked, why did I change the fingerings? And I pointed out very specific places that I felt that my fingerings allowed me to play the line better. And he listened to that and he said, good, go back and learn the movement with my fingerings and we'll play again. And I had 3 days to relearn it with his fingerings.
Mm.
And when I came back, that's the first thing I realized, that every one of his fingerings showed you how musically he wanted that phrase to be played. So if you changed one of his fingerings, you were really changing the interpretation of the piece from what he envisioned it. And you were unaware that you had changed the interpretation of the piece because you never thought of it in those terms. So when I relearned that first movement, the only measures of that first movement that I couldn't make sense of why he changed the fingerings was the first ending. The first ending, my fingerings worked better, I thought, than his musically. And so when I played again, I said, Maestro, I think I understand all your fingerings much, much better now. But one spot, this one here, and I pointed out this one spot. And he smiles and he goes, your fingerings are better. Okay. And that's when I started realizing, wait a minute, if you're going to play a Segovia edition, then if you like this interpretation, and with Ponce, I really to this day have to say, the people whose interpretation of Ponce I like the best are Segovia's and Oscar's.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not that these other players aren't good. I mean, there's some great recordings of other players,
Right.
but Segovia really captured what Ponce, because he worked in such close proximity with Ponce, he really understood what Ponce was trying to do and came up with fingerings that replicated them.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the music that Ponce wrote was music that Segovia had either asked him to write or influenced him to write.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so,
so who would know that better than the two people working together?
That's been my belief. So that's why I've always tended to, if I'm playing Ponce, it's not that I won't change the fingerings, but it's going to change most of the time I don't change the fingerings. Most of the time I play it exactly with the fingerings he did. Occasionally I may remove a slur because the way I hear the line is slightly different and I hear it more articulated than he did. But right. There are minor changes like that, Right. But that was, and the vibrato. There was a guitarist, I think he's German or Austrian guitar player, well-regarded European guitar player, a fellow by the name of Wolfgang Lindell.
Okay.
He had numerous recordings out at that time, and but he had this really kind of a bad mandolin vibrato, is the best way I could describe it. And Segovia spent an hour showing him how to do a vibrato and how to capture the vibrato and how it should capture the voice and how to sing and how to do that. And that was the best lesson I've ever heard of a vibrato, anybody give on a vibrato to this day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, for me, the class was just being around Parkening, being around Oscar, being around Michael Lormer, all of these great players that were playing for him. And they were all willing to, it's just like the way the Hart classes run. Everybody hangs out with everybody else. And you got questions.
Right.
Doesn't matter if you're the top dog in the class or the bottom dog in the class, you're going to get your question answered by whoever you want to have answer it, And that was what the Segovia class was all about.
When you left Spain and came back to the States, how did that affect your playing? I'm kind of putting some pieces together, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like a little bit in the years between you starting to take a more serious approach to classical guitar and the years with Segovia, it sounds like classical guitar took a bigger, more front seat approach in your life. And I'm guessing the gigs and jobs probably followed that. I don't know when because I know you were at Hart before, you worked at Hart before classical guitar. Is that correct?
Well, when I started the department at Hart in 1960. See, I officially the guitar department started in 1964.
Okay.
And the reason I'm hedging, the reason I'm hedging about all of this is there were in New York, there were two music schools that had guitar programs. They had the Manhattan School of Music, and I believe Manus was the other one. Okay. They had Leonine Boltini was a violinist who taught there, and then the Blaine brothers, Valdez Blaine and Alberto Blaine taught, I believe, at the other one. I think they were at Manhattan, whatever it was. But you could study classic guitar there, but you couldn't major in the instrument. Okay, so when I say Hart's the oldest, we are the first one to graduate a guitar major. That was in 1968 with Cliff Morris. Cliff was my first student, and he also joined me. He was also accepted in the Segovia Masterclass. So he and I went to the Segovia Masterclass together, which was
Can you talk a little bit about what that was like, starting that program, like the logistics of that, where you were in your life?
Where I was in my life was I was getting more and more towards classic guitar. I was still playing jazz. I was still, up until 1972, I was if the Bushnell brought in a musical or a show that needed a guitar player, I was a guitar player. If Oakdale, which did similar things, needed a guitar player, I was a guitar player. Storyton Music Tent in Springfield. So I was the session player, if you will, for that. And I was also doing some record dates and jingles and stuff like that in New York up until 72. And so I was still very active in the jazz and in the Broadway show things back then. But I was starting to do more and more touring with classic guitar. Okay. And so actually in the summer that I went to Segovia class, before I went to the Segovia class, I recorded half of my first album. And then when I came back from the Segovia class, I finished the other half of the album. So at that point, I was really starting to move forward much more as a classic guitarist. And so because I was married at that time and had two children at that time and a third on the way, I couldn't just give up playing the jazz and the shows, because that was probably Hart was probably a third of my income. Playing shows and jazz was probably a third of my income, and playing classic guitar was a third of my income. Okay. And so as I became more and more full-time, then Hart became up to half of my income. Okay. And so as a consequence, I was able to start doing less and less shows and club dates, and I was doing more and more concerts. So by 72, I was really playing with one group And most of the other work I was doing, most of the other commercial work I was doing was weddings and things like that on classic guitar. Okay, and then the rest of it was all concerts. And then in '72 is when I took the teacher exchange and I taught at the Northern College of Music for a year. And so for that whole year, I didn't even bring the electric guitar with me. I just had a classic guitar. So when I came back after a year of teaching and playing and doing nothing but concerts in Europe on classic guitar, the first week I got back, I did a club date with the band that I was with, and there were 3 tunes that I didn't know on the 4-hour gig. And that was like, okay, all right, now I know why I'm getting bored playing jazz and everything. And by the end of '72, I was no longer playing electric guitar at all.
Just out of curiosity, what kind of electric guitar were you playing? What make and model, if you remember?
I was using, for years, I played a Guild Savoy 150. That was probably the best guitar I had. And then they broke into my studio at Hart. And it was interesting. I had 2 guitars. I had a guitar by a New York builder, Manuk Papazian, a classic guitar, which was not a very, it was an expensive guitar, but it turned out to be not one of his better guitars.
Mm-hmm.
And I had my Guild 150. They left the Papazian and took the 150. And everybody in Hart, everybody in the tri-state area knew that guitar. So I don't know what happened to them. I mean, every pawn shop, anybody, it wasn't pawned in the tri-state area. Nobody, a guitar player didn't steal it, didn't use it because it would have been recognized in the gig. So I ended up getting a Gibson 175 because that's what Jim Hall was using at that time.
Right.
And that was the worst guitar I've ever owned. That thing just fed back like crazy. And then in the late 60s, maybe, probably around 68, 69, I was asked to do Grease up at Storyton. And the conductor of the show was the former assistant conductor of the original on Broadway, which my student Cliff Morris happened to have been the original guitar player for.
Oh, wow.
So when I was asked to do it, Cliff said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Here's the scoop right off the bat. You got to get yourself a Fender Strat. He'll tell you he wants a Telecaster, but he said if you can get a good Strat, get a pre-CBS Strat." So I had the opportunity of buying a very good used either a Telecaster or Strat. This guy was selling both. But the Stratocaster, because he had refinished it, he was asking less money because it wasn't the authentic.
It wasn't authentic. When you say pre-CBS, what's that?
Okay. When Fender sold the company the first time, CBS bought them out.
Ah, okay.
Okay. Up until that time, all the coils, all the windings, the coils on the pickups were hand wound.
I see.
Once CBS took them over, they were manufactured
machines. Yeah.
And so the sustain and the quality of sound went out the window. So and the reason I bought the Strat was the Strat, if I used the fingerboard pickup, had the best jazz sound of any guitar I've ever owned.
Yeah.
And then if I used the other ones, I could get any rock sound I wanted. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was my second best guitar. I mean, I had that. Wow. I ended up selling that probably, God, I want to say maybe 1980 when I bought my first Chapman.
Yeah.
I sold that. My kids, my 2 boys played electric guitar for a while, but they lost interest. And when I was convinced that they weren't going to use it, then I ended up selling it to through a broker, and that's how I bought my first Chapman.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I got off topic a little bit. So when did you? So you said you graduated the first student in '68.
Yeah.
So what was that like? And then I'm going to move forward because Hart has so many meanings to me and you, and I'm sure that's where we're going to learn a lot of really amazing stuff. But how did Hart create a guitar department, and how did you happen to be the fella that was going to man the thing?
Art didn't create the guitar department. I created the guitar department. I got frustrated by having a lot of my community division students wanting to major in guitar, particularly classic guitar, and not having any place to go. Cliff came in as a theory major in '64 on the hope that I could get the program turned and passed through. And so the biggest obstacle at that time, fortunately for me, the dean of the school, a woman, she ended up marrying, fair enough. It was Libby, her prior to Moshe's marriage was Libby Warner. She was the dean of the school. She was very open to the guitar. But the biggest obstacle was Emmanuel Wilhelm, who was the head of the music history department. And he was probably, at that point, he may have been the only PhD we had on campus in the music school at that time.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so he had a lot of clout, and he was a bright man, but he was against the guitar. And he was against the guitar for a variety of reasons. He didn't think it was a valid musical instrument, even though I did early music with him, and he liked that because, I was playing some Baroque guitar at that time and everything else. He had no problem with that, but for the modern classic guitar. And so I put forth the syllabus, which is pretty much the same as what it was when I put it through. So you had the tablature courses, you had the pedagogy course, you had the literature courses. And so all of this thing kind of mirrored like what was going on in the piano department. They had pedagogy courses, they had literature, piano literature course and everything. So I did that. And I knew that Emmanuel's big thing was, well, there's no solo repertoire for the guitar. All you do is play transcriptions.
That must have been a slam dunk for you.
Well, it wasn't as much a slam dunk because you had to, for instance, you didn't have access to the complete works of Sohr, the complete works of Giuliani. Forget about Rogondi, forget about Mertz and those people, because I knew better to include those guys in there. Okay, because Wilhelm would have never known who they were. Okay, so what I did is I put together, I said, look, we look at the Vihuela school. This is a guitar-shaped instrument that the major of the 7 Vihuelas, the most commonly written for was the E-tune Vihuela. So what's the difference between the E-tune Vihuela and the modern guitar?
Right.
Double strings and a 3rd string tuned to F sharp. That's it. Okay. So if I'm going to play this on a single string guitar, you can't call that a transcription. So I started doing all of that. Then I had working with Iodone, my initial master's thesis was going to be a transcription of the volume 1 of Debussy Baroque guitar music. Okay. Which got sidetracked because I had a falling out with my advisor. But so I knew that I could do Debussy. I knew I could put Sans. I knew I could put all these Baroque guitar pieces in there. And then I knew about Giuliani. And so I started putting a lot of Giuliani work, a lot of the bigger Sohr works in there. And then, of course, we had Villa-Lobos who had written the etudes and the preludes. A lot of
Right.
good 20th century music was being written at that time. So I included some of those things. And then I included a bunch of the Spanish transcriptions, mainly because they were more frequently heard in concert on guitar than they were on piano.
Right.
Okay, because
Sweet Española.
Sweet Espanol, the Granadas dances, any of that stuff, you rarely ever heard a piano recital or pianist playing that. Okay,
Right.
so I put together like 5 different programs, and when they walked in, of course, the first question he said, "Well, you have no repertoire." I said, "Well, here's 5 different solo programs." I said, "I'm not even talking to you about the chamber music yet. I'm just talking about the 5 things." So I said, well, these are the with the exception of Bach, these aren't first-rate composers. Bach's a transcription. I said, okay, now we offer degree in bassoon performance, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Can you put together 5 solo recitals of bassoon music by major composers? What about double bass? We offer a double bass performance degree. Okay, we offer a viola degree.
Was there saxophone at the time? Because saxophone
No, there was no
very
saxophone
late to the game.
There was no saxophone. Yeah. That was much later. Okay, so that shut him down, and at that point, Libby Warner came in and she said, "Look, Emmanuel, this is a valid program. These are really valid courses. He's equipped to teach all of these courses." And this is something that would really open up the doors for the Hart School for guitar. So he grudgingly gave the go ahead for that, and so that's how it came. And so Cliff was able to, in his 3rd year, take all the courses that he didn't take that were on the syllabus, and he graduated in '68. And then that I was very content with that for a number of years, maybe 68, probably to the mid 70s. And then there was really no place to go get a master's, and we were getting some really good players, but there was no place to go. So I put through the master's program, and that was a little less of a struggle because by that time, Emmanuel and Emmanuel started the few young players that came through the program. Fortunately for me, they were all very, very gifted, and they were all very bright. And so when they took Wilhelm's music history classes, they were always some of the better students in the class. So he suddenly started realizing that that this guitar program at least had musical validity. So the master's program became was much easier to do, and then ultimately the doctoral program that was just the simplest piece of cake going.
Now, when I would imagine as you were manning this sort of establishment, I guess to back up, to have some backstory to my comment / question, I'm thinking of the guitar as an instrument that's always had to fight for its relevance. We know that Giuliani was very frustrated with having to always sit there and comp singers, and that's why he wrote a lot of his.
I would disagree with it. I've never read anything about how frustrated Giuliani was about that. Giuliani was a first-class cellist, so he played cello in some of Beethoven's symphonies, okay, the premieres. So, and he everything I've ever read about him, and most of the stuff that I've read about him came out of Tom Heck's both his doctoral dissertation and later his published book about Giuliani. There was never about that he was disgruntled about accompanying singers at all.
I remember reading something, just a small excerpt. The reason that I bring that up is I'm thinking that guitarists, in my opinion, have in some ways had to work harder.
You're right.
Because for various reasons, many of those self-inflicted, but but as you're going, which was leading to my question is, as you're going through and starting this program and graduating your first student and growing and growing and growing, and then opening a master's program, I'm imagining that around the country, there are other schools following suit, either by seeing what you're doing or from the widespread takeover that guitar had.
Right. New England Conservatory, which was actually the head of that department for a while, was a former student of mine. They started a guitar program based off of ours. New England Conservatory, before Ellie got there, they developed a performance program. San Francisco Conservatory developed a program. Then Claire Callahan started one at University of Cincinnati. I can't remember. Ithaca and Eastman came in later. Mainly, I want to say it was late 70s, early 80s when Eastman came, because I was one of 3 guitar teachers that they approached if we'd be interested in starting a program up there. And I was very happy at heart. And so it ended up that, again, a former student of mine, Nick Galusis, who ended up studying with Manuel at Manhattan, he ended up running the program, and he still runs the program.
He's still there. Yeah. I know a couple of young players that went and to go study with him. What, you had such an interesting place as all of this was developing, and you got there. What was like Segovia's tenets? It was to save guitar from the flamenco players, but it was also to establish an academic guitar setting. So you're there as it's really starting to happen in the United States.
Yeah.
You didn't come along midway. You didn't come along at the end. You really started at the beginning. What was that like to start something that you knew had a purpose? You didn't have to validate it to people, but then all of a sudden it grows into this massive thing.
First of all, you establish extremely, extremely tight boundaries where you don't put up with any garbage. You notice how quickly I got on you about Giuliani, that statement about Giuliani that you.
It was grad school was a blur, Dick. I don't remember what I read or didn't read.
Okay, no, but you remember, you saw how quickly I came out about that.
Yeah.
Well, now picture this: somebody's coming up to me and saying, "Oh, I have this guitar student in my theory class. He's terrible. What are you going to do about it?" And I look at the guy and say, "Wait a minute, excuse me. I don't know anything about it. I'm not a theory teacher. Why am I responsible for how a student does in your class? Are you doing a really good job teaching your class, or are you just picking on this kid because you're a lousy teacher and he can't learn because you're a lousy teacher?" Okay, which doesn't win friends, but it really keeps you in perspective, and people stop trying to walk over you.
Right.
That is essentially how this guitar department has been built. And it had to been built. The first time I could relax was the first time Larry Allen Smith became the dean of the school. Larry was the first time who looked upon the guitar as being a member of heart. From Larry on Larry, and then Malcolm Morrison was the same way. Malcolm was, if anything, even more supportive than Larry was. Okay.
When did Larry get into that position?
What do you mean? When did he get it? Larry Allen Smith?
Yeah. When did he start? When was that?
Let's see. He must have been, I want to say somewhere late 80s, early 90s. I'm not exactly sure. Okay. Unlike Chris, my backward memory is never good. If you asked me, when did you graduate? I would make a guess and say within the last 10 years. Okay. But I'm not sure if it's within the last 10 years. It may be longer than that.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
if you're saying to me, when did Pete study with you? Have no idea. Okay. What I remember about Pete was a member of the class that started turning this thing around. So in Pete's class was Dave Cullen, Alan Goldspiel, David Mintz, Tomas Tessitore, Eric Ace, and Randy Emmons. And that consistently across the board, those guys were bright and very, very gifted. Okay. Some like Peter and Dave Cullen. Am I leaving anybody? In Goldspiel, they've stayed in and made very successful careers, both as college teachers and performers. Okay. The others have, Randy became an airline pilot. I think Eric, if I remember right, is a computer specialist. Mintz is a court translator, I think. But they were all really, that was the beginning, and that's when we had to add a second guitar teacher.
Right.
At that point, and we added Alan Spreetzersbach.
Yeah. Where does Oscar fall into all of this? Because
Oscar started coming in '68. I took the Segovia class. In '69, I took the Bream class in Toronto and Ottawa. And after the '69 class, it really dawned on me that we really started to have summer guitar festivals.
Right.
So in 1970, I approached Oscar about doing a 2-week master class at Hart.
Were you studying with him regularly at this time, or was this?
I kept contact with Oscar at that point.
Okay.
So when he was doing a lot of concerts in New York and New Haven, and I would always get a lesson with him. But in '70, when he came over for that summer festival, that's when we became good friends. And from that point on, from '70 through most of the '80s, whenever he had a hole in his tour, he stayed with us, and I get free lessons. That was the way it worked.
Nice.
So that's how that came about. And so for a couple of years, we had Oscar coming consistently. Then he had Aspen. So then now we were limited with Oscar because of Aspen. So then I brought in Michael Lormer. We brought in Ray Delatorre for a couple of years. I was able to get Manuel to come up for 2 or 3 years in a row.
Wow.
When his career was first starting. So we always tried to get, there was always it was a 2-week master class. And the way it would be was that initially myself, I would teach the observers, and the performers, who would only be the ones who would be playing for Oscar or whoever the artist was, that would be their thing. And everybody else would have lessons with me. And then as the department expanded, then Alan and I would do the teaching, Then in the mid '80s, what the heck was his name? The dean of the school, whose name escapes me at the time, he was pre-Larry, decided that he wanted a different format for the master classes. And so in '88, he insisted that I bring in David Tannenbaum for the master class, okay, which I had no problem with, except that David at that time was not a big name. But he knew David because David was big with contemporary music, and David was doing a lot of world premieres. So I said to him, I think David would be a great teacher. The reason I've never brought him in, he doesn't have a big of enough following yet to fill this thing. Don't worry about it. It's my responsibility. The class is going to be filled. Well, that class was the only time in the history of a guitar festival at heart that did not make money. Okay.
Ouch.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then now he got pissed at me, and I said, look, you said not to worry about it.
Yeah.
This is who you wanted to do. And it
Those are
started
boundaries that
escalating.
you're talking about.
Pardon?
Those are the boundaries that you're talking about.
Yeah. And it started escalating. And that was also the time that I was starting to go through divorce with my wife. So that's the time I went in at one point and I said, okay, I'm no longer at the end of this year, I no longer want to be the chair of the guitar department. So then he thought, this is great. Fortunately, I had tenure at the time. So then he thought, oh, great, I'll get a big name in. So he offers the job to David Tannenbaum. And David goes, well, Dick's teaching there. Dick's doesn't, I don't want to, I don't want to compete with Dick. I'm not interested in that. Well, we'll buy Dick out of his contract. Well, then I definitely don't want the job.
Yeah.
Okay. Then he did the same thing to David Stairben. And David Stairben,
Ouch. Yeah.
Basically, these are, these are, I don't want to say they're friends. They're very serious acquaintances. Okay. Because David, I see once every 2 or 3 years, if I'm lucky, because our paths cross, and we get along famously, and I love what he does, and I've always been a supporter of Bridge Records and everything else. But so that's when he made Spreechesbach the chair, and then for the next 3 years, he tried getting me. I got 3 years of bad teaching evaluations from my department chair.
Yeah.
And all 3 of them I was able to refute because I knew how to play the game, and each one of them was overturned, and finally he left and took another job, and Larry came on board, and everything went back to normal. But oh yeah, it was a very and it still is. I mean, right now we're trying to recoup what we lost from Aaron Flagg. And I mean, that's going to take, I talked to Chris actually this morning. Chris said that it sounds like they've got a couple of good undergraduates and a bunch of non-performance majors, and 2 or 3 good master students and a doctoral student. So hopefully,
I'd love to, if we could go places without masks, I'd love to just sit in that hall again and listen to studio class. I want to ask you about a couple things while I have you, because I mean, there's just so much in that. And I also want to keep moving forward and ask you some things about the present now. But you were talking about, briefly, could you just tell me about what that Bream masterclass was like?
The Bream masterclass was very interesting. It's very, very different than Segovia's. I learned some very practical things about the Bream through the Bream masterclass. I made some great friends through that Bream masterclass. That's how I met Jeff Van for the first time, and we've been friends ever since. But it wasn't the same artistic level. It was much more, and it coming after the Segovia class, I was very disappointed after that class. I mean, I learned a lot from that class, but I was very frustrated with that class because of how things were taught and so on and so forth. So to me, it was not a productive class for me. Although in retrospect, I did learn an awful lot of that, because I did try to be as open as I possibly could, and not let my prejudice take over there.
Right. And then the other thing that I want to ask, and then I kind of have a little questionnaire that I'm going to ask you at the end, is I want to know kind of like, when I was at the Hart School and I was there for my master's, you would talk a lot about Oscar, and I developed at the end of my master's program and then afterward a deep infatuation with him. He's by far my favorite classical guitar player and one of my favorite guitar players and musicians of all time, even like up there with, you know, the electric guitar came before the classical guitar. Like Clapton was my god for the longest time,
Oh
but
yeah, yeah.
Oscar's up there with him. What did he give you?
Oscar, and to anybody who's listening to this, I am not in any way denigrating any of the top level players that are out there right now, because they're all great. But Oscar is, in my estimation, the only real musician out there. And why do I say that? Because to me, a musician knows more than his or her repertoire. A musician knows the symphonies of Beethoven, Brahms, contemporary music, the Renaissance. They know everything about this thing, and they try to integrate it into their playing. And so, in that regard, everybody says Parkening was Segovia's disciple and brought his legend forward.
I disagree.
That's not true, because what Chris did is he's a great copier of the way Segovia plays, but he doesn't bring the aesthetic to the music and the love of music and the depth of searching a score that Segovia did. And that's what Oscar does. I mean, when I was listening to Oscar in his prime, if I closed my eyes, I could picture Segovia on the stage. Yeah. Not that he sounds like Segovia, but I could hear Segovia's aesthetic.
Yeah.
And that's what I got from Oscar, and that's what I tried to pass on to my students. Okay, it's harder to pass on to students now. I mean, one of the reasons aside from the single biggest reason that I decided to retire was Aaron Flagg. I could not put up with that kind of garbage anymore. But the other thing that was starting to weigh on me was the young up and coming players are more interested into how many notes they can play and how fast they can play,
right,
rather than what is the music about. Okay. Yeah. And so, whether it's a lot of these classic guitar players came out of the heavy metal tradition, and whether that it's a heavy metal transition into classic guitar, I don't know. Okay. But I do know that that's a hard nut to break. The one young student that I have, Liam, is not falling into that trap. I mean, he's really, for a 16-year-old, he's playing with a lot of musical depth, and yeah, he's got good technique, and yeah, he's trying to get better, and when he definitely is going to be going into music after he's a junior now. After next year, he'll probably be going someplace, maybe, hopefully Hart, but who knows, there aren't that many. There aren't that many out there right now, and more importantly, a lot of the departments, a lot of the more classically based music departments that are now leaning more and more towards jazz, and there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's about time that they recognize jazz, but that's going to affect right now. I mean, do you teach privately anywhere now, or are you just doing public?
No, I've been on about a two year break because of the full-time music.
Yeah, right. So, but how many classic guitar students do you think you would have if you went to start teaching again?
Right now, I'm not sure. When I stopped, I had students that were very interested, but I had high quality students, but a very, very low number of them.
Yeah. And
with regular guitar, I had as many as I wanted.
Right. And when I built up the guitar department at Hart, when I was teaching in the community division before I had a full-time gig in the college, a lot of my students were folkies because
Yeah.
that was the element of, so somebody would come in, say, I want to learn some Peter, Paul, and Mary licks, and I could play 2 or 3 tunes at that time, and right off the record, and I said, you want to sound like, oh, that's fantastic. Okay, now you have to learn to read music, and you have to develop a technique. So
Yeah.
you're going to have to, before I even start showing you this stuff, you have to spend a year learning the techniques of how to play classic guitar. And as you develop the techniques, I'll introduce you to some of their simpler tunes, and we'll start doing that. And which is the way I taught them. So I was teaching classic guitar to a bunch of folk players. And the majority of them, by the time they developed the technique to do all the folk stuff that they wanted to do, they realized it was so simple compared to what they were able to do on classic guitar, that many of them continued and became classic guitarists.
Yeah.
So that was the big hook, if you will, back then. We don't have a hook right now.
No, there's something very, I will say the social media game is making jazz and jazz fusion and that kind of stuff really sort of hip and sexy again, which I think is great because that stuff deserves its time in the light. But I wonder where we are. And I know the Instagram community is a big community that sees these episodes that I make. It's very insular, which is a double-edged sword, but it's also, some of it is very concerned with how clean, how fast, how contemporary, how bizarre, how forward thinking you are. And again, circling back, that's why someone like Oscar, I think, is probably so attractive to me, the kind of music that he makes. I told this story on the show before, and I'll tell you the brief version of it. My first year of teaching 6th grade, I wasn't sure what to do as an initiation, and somebody recommended, why don't you do a free writing thing where they come in the room, sit down quietly, you play some music, and they just write whatever they want. And I did it, and I tried it, and I played some different kinds of music. I played some progressive rock, I played some this, I played some classical, a lot of classical guitar, and nobody had anything really. I mean, here's a story of somebody at the beach, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I played Oscar's version, and I don't remember what the recording was. It may have been for Naxos. I don't know what it was, but he was playing the slow movement from the Ponce Romantica. And I had a 6th grader tell me like a chapter book that she wrote. And I thought, and no, and she's this is somebody who didn't really give a crap about that music. She probably would never care about it again, but something touched her in a way that only his an understanding like that could evoke from somebody. And so I think I would rather play slow and sloppy, two things that he's not, but I'd rather play slow and sloppy and be musical than concern myself with how many weights I can lift,
Oh yeah, well, but it just as jazz is having its cycle, when I got out of jazz in 72, 73, it was on its down cycle. So it's getting harder and harder. I was the original group before the 880 Club. It was a place called Joey's Place. And I had a trio in there 3 nights a week for 2 years until Joe sold it to the owners of the 880 Club. Okay. And the bass player on that job was Ron McClure, and who went on to a successful career initially with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and now he's a top New York freelance jazz bass player.
Right.
And so there's, but back and now, if you look at jazz, the young players, there are guys that just move their fingers, but there are enough 40-year-old jazz players, 40, 50-year-old jazz players that are coming up and are making a name for themselves, that play with soul. I mean, the guy that comes to mind for me is Peter Bernstein. Right. I mean, he knows every tune in the book, and he just, his improvisations are great, and sure. there's soul in their playing, and even the older fusion players like Larry Carlton. I mean, Larry Carlton could as far as I could sell you the Brooklyn Bridge,
Right.
the
Yeah.
middle of
He's got
Mojave
something
Desert,
else.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's going to be a feedback down.
Right.
There's going to be the only thing that scares me about the future of classical music and classical guitar is the dearth of new recordings. And that's because the kids don't buy the recordings. And you can't get a recording of Manuel Barabueco playing the Five Villalobos Preludes anymore.
Right.
It's out of print. Okay.
Right.
Fortunately, Sony Classics, and one of the few brightest things I think they ever did is when John left them, when he was retiring, they issued a box set of every recording he ever made. And you could buy it at that time. I think I bought it. I think there's 90 CDs in this thing, and I bought it, and they were selling it an introductory price of $100 for the 90 CDs.
I'll give you $100 for it right now.
Well, right now you can't touch it for under $200 on the thing. Wow. And it's everything that Williams has ever recorded, everything. Right. Okay, except the new stuff that he's doing on his own label, which you can still get. Okay, right. Manuel is doing the same thing with Tonar Records. You know, he's the only one that's putting out new things. David Russell seems to be putting out new things, but Telarc seems to be slowing down how much they're doing. Andy's putting out new things.
Right.
But Andy is self-publishing, and that's why and so he's doing it always through Kickstarter program. Right. Which he's guaranteeing you're going to buy his recordings. But this is the big problem. This is what when I was doing teaching principles class, and even in studio class, you a lot of times they say, what recordings you listen? Well, I listen to this. You don't own the recording. No, you don't own the recording.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm shocked. When I remember, I think it was Alex. I asked at one point, how many classical guitar recordings do you own? He said, I got a lot. I have 30. And I started laughing.
Yeah.
And that is a lot by modern standards.
Right.
I had 30 CDs. I mean, 30 recordings because they weren't CDs back then. I had 30, but when they were expensive, you say, yeah, you could buy an album for $7 or $8 an album. Yeah. Right. In 1960, I could also buy a cup of coffee for 25 cents. So now, yeah, for $7 is a lot of money when you can buy a cup of coffee for 25 cents.
Right. And there's such, I mean, you spoke about this, there's such a reduced volume of works that are available. I cannot tell you how many times Chris has said, go find, it was Scott Tennant's version of the Grand Overture. He said, go listen to Scott's and listen to what Scott does. I can't find it anywhere. Somebody had to send me a YouTube link, and I can't find it for sale. Right, exactly.
Now I have all of those records.
Right.
Okay. I'm 2 CDs behind in buying Manuel's latest CDs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. 2. All right. I don't think I'm behind any of David Russell's. Okay. Now I'm retired. Why am I buying CDs?
Why not?
Well, because I want to be, Scott's recording of the Grand Overture is one of the best recordings. I want to, if I feel like listening to the Grand Overture, he and David Russell's are probably the 2 that I'll put on first.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. For different reasons.
Right.
But they're both great because they both present something beyond the superficiality of the notes.
And there's something really special about the idea that, I mean, let's see, is it over here? I have an old Oscar Ghiglia vinyl, and he plays half of the Bach pieces that are on that are on some of his newest release, which is on streaming platforms. So you can hear how his idea of a 350-year-old piece has changed over 50 years, and that's a wonderful thing to be able to own because you can't stream that stuff online.
I have 3 different recordings of Anna Bilsma playing the Bach cello suites. They were all done in 10-year increments. And you can see how the whole interpretation is evolved. I have 2 recordings of Alicia de la Roca playing all of the complete works of Albéniz. Okay. Again, they were done 20 years apart.
Yeah.
So you hear how certain tempos go up, certain tempos go down, you know?
Yes.
And that's the missing link.
Yeah.
And that's the scary thing right now is that technology is still out there. We still reclaim this, you know. Right. The good thing about Scott's recordings is the company is owned by Odair Assad.
Okay.
Cool. So you know she's got the masters of that. Okay.
Right.
So at some point that could be reissued at some time. Okay.
Right. These people are accessible
for the time being. Okay?
Right.
But you know, this is the irony. This is the irony. Because of the limited availability of records, then you're not maintaining this legacy, this history.
Right.
You know, it was funny when Chris first started teaching at Hart. You know, we had a thing with auditions. We wanted to see what year it would be when an incoming high school senior did not know the names Andre Segovia. Okay, and believe it or not, it was fairly recent before that happened. It's probably within the last 10 years that happened. Okay, but now a number of people, for instance, Liam, my student, he never heard of Julian Bream. Yeah.
Wow.
He never heard of Julian Bream.
We have you know, there's so many ways that you could attack this problem, but you're right, there's an irony to it because we have the technology. There's nothing, you know, stopping classical guitarists from coming in and copying all the CDs you have, and for a monthly subscription you can listen to or purchase digitally or whatever. Like, the amount of information is in there. If we want to learn about ourselves as players, we have to learn about the history, and that's just as important as the facsimiles are to the editions.
Well, we didn't evolve to where we are now as a classic guitarist without a number of people in front of us laying the groundwork.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You know, you look at the women's right to vote, which we take for granted. I mean, in 1920, that was not a given.
Right.
You know, and you know, it's the same thing now with Black Lives Matter and all this stuff. I mean, if you've ever read Ron Carter's autobiography, you can. I mean, I knew. Ron is, I think, 3 years older than me. I'm 80. I'll be 83 the end of this month, and I think Ron is 86. So he was at Eastman when I was at Hart, and you know, I remember even in '56 at Hart hearing from some of my black students who were from the Rochester area who decided to come to Hart, and I say, well, why did you come to Hart? Oh, Eastman, if you're black, Eastman's not a good place to go.
Yeah.
And you know, in Ron's book, Ron was a really good cellist when he went to Eastman on a cello scholarship, and there was an audition open. I think he said Detroit Symphony, some symphony, and his teacher said, "Don't even bother. You won't get in." What do you mean I won't get? You're black. They won't take you. Black. And he said, if I were you, if you want to make a living in music, you better learn to play double bass, because jazz is the only place you're going to be as a black person. Yeah. And this is we're talking about somewhere between 56 and 65.
Which is coincidentally, when you mentioned Detroit, which is coincidentally when Motown started to take Black people because of Berry Gordy was inspired partly because of the orchestra in Detroit, but mostly white musicians, and then made a place for a lot of Black musicians in
Right.
Detroit. But you're right. There's an absolute we can't evolve, and we also can't get better in any sense unless we
No,
acknowledge the
no,
past.
no.
Um,
And that's the scary part. I think for the young players coming up, I think it's harder. It's going to be harder to become a true artist.
right.
You'll be able to play clean. You'll be able to play fast. You'll be able to play lots of things that were impossible for me to play when I was in my prime, because
Right.
I didn't have that advanced a technique. Okay, but the artistry that whether you listen to Manuel or whether you listen to David Russell or any of the top level players, there's an artistry in their playing. Okay, and that's getting lesser and lesser. And all of these people we're talking about, they're in their 60s. I mean, John Williams is 80 years old.
Yeah.
Give or take a year on either side. I never remember if he's 3 years younger than me or 2 years younger than me. But
Yeah.
and so he's the old man. He's the old man, And Manuel and David Russell and David Tannenbaum, David Sterpen, they're all in their 60s.
Yeah.
LAGQ, with the exception of Matt Grief, they're all in their 60s.
Wow, that's a lot, and that's really helpful to put that all into perspective. Thank you so much. Before we go, first, I was going to ask you projections for the future, but you answered that question perfectly. So thank you. Before we go, I'm going to give you a rapid fire 5-question. You can answer this as quick as you'd like to. These are just kind of a fun little 5-question questionnaire thing we do at the end of each episode, just to have fun a little bit. Question number 1, what is the best gig you've ever had?
Wow. Off the top of my head, what the duo had a residency in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands.
Oh, wow.
About 20 years ago. And they put us up. The gig didn't pay anything. It was a free gig, but it didn't cost us anything. We could bring our wives with us. So they put us up in a 5-star hotel.
That's priceless.
Oh yeah. They put us up at a 5-star hotel right on the beach. They fed us, and we played in this old reclaimed sugarcane plantation with no electricity.
Wow.
So we played with candle lights, and then luckily we had battery powered stand lights. Otherwise we would have been really in trouble. So
all about these things right here.
They weren't available at that time.
Yeah.
We had something that was not quite as slick as that. And so we were there for 5 days, and we did two of these concerts that were sold out, and this thing. The acoustics were fantastic. The audience was fantastic. And then we did 2 outside school concerts underneath the most gigantic turpentine tree I've ever seen.
Wow.
The shade from this turpentine tree shaded 200 school students sitting on the lawn in front of us.
Wow.
It was unbelievable. And so that was our gig. That was probably the most enjoyable gig off the top of my head.
Awesome.
I have to say, in general, I don't think I've ever not enjoyed a gig, whether it be a concert or whether it was a master class. There was always something about it that stood out for me.
Well, we're going to challenge that with question number 2, which is, what is the worst gig you've ever had?
Okay. And this is not a slam on the organization. This is a slam.
Okay.
The only 2 times in my life that I've never had performance anxiety before a concert were 2 concerts I did for the defunct Boston Guitar Society. and they were the longest concerts of my life, or so it seemed.
Oh, no.
It was like, I can only imagine what it would be like having a lifetime job flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. And this is what these two concerts felt like to me. The people who were there thought it was a great concert. They were so uninspired to me. And we're talking now, we're talking 50 years ago. We're talking, that's how far back this is. And that's how indelibly ingrained they are.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's what is question number 3 is what is the best advice you've ever received and who gave it to you? Music related or not, it doesn't matter.
I had because I was a theory major, I studied composition for 4 years with Arnold Franchetti, he was a former pupil of Richard Strauss. And I studied with him privately at his home. And so Arnold was, everything was about aesthetics. And he said, if music doesn't move you, then you shouldn't be in music. And like the worst compliment the worst thing you could say to him if you went up to him after a concert of a new piece that was premiered is, oh, what a nice piece. That was an insult, because he didn't want those kinds of nebulous kinds of comments. He wanted you, I hated that piece. That piece, I can't. How did you write that piece? It's terrible. Or, oh my God, that brought tears to my eyes. He wanted every piece he wrote to emotionally impact you, like that student that you said wrote a book on hearing. And so that is really what I've tried to do. When I play, I want to touch somebody. And part of the reason I don't play publicly anymore is I can't count on my hands. And if I can't count on my hands, then I can't get into the music the way I expect to get into the music, to play the way I want to play. So,
yeah. Question number 4, the penultimate question. I learned that word way too late in life. I could have used that word in a lot of really helpful spots and papers, made me seem a lot more smarter than I was. Question number 4 is what never fails to inspire you?
Good playing. Good playing. Good playing or good art. In other words, even though I'm focusing on photography now, photography has always been my hobby. But and I would always love to go to galleries and things like that. If I see a work of art that moves me, I'm inspired. If I sit through a master class that's well taught, people played well, I'm inspired. If I go to a concert and somebody really touched me with their playing, I can't wait to come home and pick up the guitar.
That's one of my things too. And then last question on the list is what is your current favorite non-music related activity to engage in?
Photography.
Yeah.
And it's so similar to performance, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
In fact, I use photography now with my teaching with the students, the few students that I have, because it's so much easier to understand the subtlety of what we have to do as a performer if I show it to you in a photographic image.
Yeah.
Because I can show you the various stages of its development. I can't do that so well with music.
I think I was present for maybe at the beginning of your trying to merge these two subjects, the photography into your teaching. And I remember we were sitting down in one of the 3rd floor rooms before we got that beautiful 21 room and there was just an image of a waterfall that you took. And we were just, all of us, we were like, does Dick know what class we're in?
Well, there's the post processing that goes on into making a great photograph.
Right.
I mean, yes, you've got to have the eye to take a good image, first of all. But now you have that's like you learned the notes to the piece. Okay. Now, how do you take that notes and bring it to the artistic level? Well, in photography, you can show the various stages because you can print out those pictures. And each stage, you can look at it and you can say, wow, that looks good. Yeah, I like that. Okay, but it's not done yet. What do you mean it's not done? Oh, oh my God, that looks so much better. Yeah, but that's not done either. Now, unfortunately, you can't necessarily do that in an audio recording because what happens, the ear adapts to what they are familiar with. So you've been playing piece for a while. You may say, well, I think I'm really I'm playing this piece this phrase really expressively. Well, have you tried playing at different levels of expression? And the answer usually is no, because it's harder to experiment on a musical instrument unless you've got a really brilliant technique.
Right.
So for the student, it's harder to raise that level up, I think.
Yeah. One of the things that Chris has me do sometimes when we're talking about that is he'll say, play this as if so-and-so is playing it. And a lot of times you get different ideas of expression, because if I'm playing something, if I'm imitating how I think Segovia would play something versus John Williams versus Bream versus Marchandilla, those are all 4 different levels somewhere of expression, maybe not in the same progressive manner, but in a way that exercises something that wouldn't always necessarily be there.
Better way is look for a piece by either a string quartet or a cello or a good solo violinist that has similar lines, and see how they express it, how they express it dynamically with vibrato and with rhythm.
Sure.
Because that's something, see, as a guitar player, we tend to be too insular.
Yeah.
Okay. And if and this is why singing, if you do singing and you get good at it and you start singing like a conductor would sing, or a concert pianist would sing, or a good violinist would sing, then you start realizing that your fingers put some boundaries on what you think you can do. And they limit your thinking and they limit your creative process. That's always been. That's why a lot of times, even now when I teach, I'll sing the phrase to somebody and I'll say, sing it back to me. And inevitably, the one thing they don't hear is the vibrato in my voice.
Right.
And I say, you're missing something. What are you? Listen again. And the good ones will start hearing it. And once they start hearing it, then it becomes part of their playing.
Right.
But as long as you're limiting yourself to the guitar and what I can do or can't do on the guitar, you're really limiting what you're going to be able to do musically.
I've played a lot of things for Chris where he has said, no, don't do that, or I wouldn't do that. But I have very rarely sung something for Chris and him saying I wouldn't sing it that way. So there's something very, very intrinsically understandable about music in the voice.
2 things that go on in the voice automatically: breathing and vibrato.
Yeah.
And these are the 2 things that we don't have to do to play the guitar. Pianists have a hard time with this. The good pianists don't, but the student pianists, they play run-on sentences. A lot of string players, I can count on one hand the amount of string players I enjoy playing with. Okay, and really, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4.
You should send them Christmas cards.
I do. We're still good friends.
Thank you so very, very much for doing this.
My pleasure.
I hope that we get out of this sometime soon and can have a guitar party again.